Welcome, everyone, to this episode. I am really thrilled to have our special guest today. So, before I begin, let me share with you why I put this particular episode together. Now that we are heading towards the end of the year, many high school seniors are now facing their very first times having to do college application interviews. And so, for many students, this is the first time ever that they've actually had an interview. And many students have told me that they are nervous. They don't feel like they're sounding like themselves. They're not sure how to sound quote unquote smart on the interview. And as soon as these problems were being shared with me, I knew I had to have our guests today have a conversation with me about interviews. So today I have Tracy Goodwin, who is an internationally known voice expert. And she has worked with thousands of celebrities, thought leaders, professionals, entrepreneurs, and even the state Supreme Court justices over the last 30 plus years to help them really unleash their greatest asset, which is their real voice, so that they command a presence, can captivate their listeners, and make a bigger impact with their messages. And so I thought no one else would be better than Tracy to help us with understanding how do we get better control of our voice during interviews, especially now during the pandemic, or as we are emerging from the pandemic, and primarily talking and having these interviews through Zooms or through virtual settings instead of in person. So a little bit more about Tracy. She is the host of a podcast called Captivate the Room, and it gets thousands of downloads per month. She holds a BFA degree from Baylor University and holds 2 master's degrees. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Tracy for a couple years now. We met each other through a business program that we were both in together. And so I'm so thrilled to have her today. So Tracy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and it's great to see you.
Oh, likewise. I know our students and their families are going to learn so much from this conversation. So let's start off first, Tracy, with you telling us more about who you are and what you do, because I know a lot of folks probably have never heard of a voice expert. Typically, they think voice coaches are singing coaches, and that's not what you do. So tell us more about what it is you do.
That's exactly right. When you say voice coach, people initially think, oh, singing, or maybe they might think speaking, presentation wise. And that is all true. But what I do is a little bit different. I've done this for many, many, many years. And I have created a methodology that is research based that really helps people stand in the full power of their voice, to have that confidence and that inner freedom, to be able to be connected with, people connect with us, and ultimately to captivate the room. So I see voice coaching as an inside and an outside job, because our voice is probably our most underutilized asset, and it is truly the greatest asset we have. So I help people to get to that, which we're all born with, and refine that so they can make the biggest impact.
I think that's so powerful, because while we're talking about interviews today, what you teach can be applied anywhere. How we interact with people, presentations students or even their parents might be giving in class or later on at work, right? So there's so much power there in figuring out how do you control your voice? How do you make sure you're projecting what it is your authentic self is? And so I thought truly you would be able to share so many insights that people can use immediately after listening to our conversation today. So for those of you who are watching this live, we are streaming this on Facebook Live. We're also having this on YouTube as well. Let us know in the comments. Tell us if you are a parent or if you're a student. Let us know what grade you're in if you're the student. And let us know any questions you have for Tracy about interviews or about using your authentic voice. And we will do our best to either address them live, or we will come back and look at the comments and reply back. So Tracy, when students go into college interviews, one of their biggest fears is not sounding quote unquote smart. And I say quote unquote smart because that could mean all sorts of different things. And they're worried about having a shaky voice. So a lot of times when students are nervous, their voices really shrink, or they kind of whisper, or they get really crackly with their voices. What tips do you have around that?
Well, there's a couple of things I want to address here. And this is, first of all, incredibly common. But I want to start with something, one of those inside pieces that I talk about. And I want to ask the question, okay, you think or feel not so smart, but is that the truth? That's not the truth. That's your subconscious trying to aid and abet your voice being small, because your subconscious wants to keep you safe. You see, the subconscious wants to protect your heart. Your voice is the orchestra of your heart. So first, I want to dispel the message that your subconscious is giving you that you're not smart. And that's one of the first things that you can do when you hear that noise in your head. You're not going to get this. They don't like you. You're not very smart. Who are you to be here? Stop right there and ask the question, is this ultimately true? And pretty much every single time you're going to discover that, no, it's not true. Yes, you deserve to be there. You've done the work. You've worked hard. You're smart. You're deserving. And so you start with that. And that's one of the inside pieces. But then I suspect that you are highly prepared for your interviews. And so one of the techniques that I can give you is something that I call boldly own. Boldly own it like it's a fact. So if you were sitting in front of me, and I could do this with Mary Grace right now, I could say, tell me a fact. And she would own it. She would say, I have brown hair, or I'm sitting in a chair, or something like that is a fact. There is no difference when you answer the questions that you've been asked, because you really do know the answer. And a lot of times I think that's that subconscious messing with us again, wanting us to believe we don't know, but you do. And even if you don't, that's okay too. I want you to boldly own everything you say like it's a fact, even if the answer is, I'm not 100% sure. That's okay. Boldly own it like it's a fact. So there's a couple of things that we can look at, and I can certainly give you more.
I love that perspective of first validating whether or not whatever you're feeling is true. Because oftentimes these students, especially the ones that I'm working with, are amazing. They've accomplished so much. They've done well in school. They're super passionate. And then something happens where they just start doubting, do I belong? Will I be chosen? Just the college application process instills a lot of doubt, right? In that uncertainty. And so having students just remember, I'm here for a reason. I deserve my fair shot at being considered. And so I love that first part. And the second part of boldly owning and speaking as if it were fact. It's so fascinating because a lot of the questions that do pop up on interviews are things that they do know, such as tell me about yourself, or what's your favorite extracurricular, or why do you want to go to this school, or tell us about a time you showed leadership. These are things students have written many essays about in their applications, or had to fill out in the extracurricular section of the application. So they know the answer. And then suddenly when they're in that setting, because maybe they haven't had the practice to articulate it before, maybe it's because they're talking to an adult they don't know. There's all these different aspects where suddenly they start doubting their answers, even though they know it. And so that powerful perspective of just owning it and acting as if that is the truth, because it is such a helpful reminder.
Yes. And, a lot of people will say, and I don't mean this as a discredit at all, but we always want to support our children. We always want to support our friends. We always want to support people. And a lot of times we'll say, well, you've got this, just be confident, just go in there and be confident. And I get it. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. There's no tangible to just go in there and be confident. And I want to tell you something. I want to let you in on something. True confidence is coming from inside. And that's why this noise piece is so important. Because if I'm buying into the noise that I don't know, that is going to cause my confidence to wobble, which is going to cause my voice to wobble. But just like you were saying, if I know that they're prepared, I know y'all are. And if you literally work from that place, now let me tell you something else about internal and confidence. You have to also work from the place of knowing that you're going to get it right. And I think a lot of times that's what happens in interviews. We start to read the room, we start to see faces, we start to question ourselves, and then we start working to try to get it right when we already had it right, because we've done the work, we've prepared, we know what we're talking about. And what does that mean anyway? How do I know if you got it right? I want to know who you are.
That's so powerful. You know, another thing I hear students have difficulty with too, especially over online interviews, is sounding natural or sounding like themselves. And suddenly they become very robotic. And I know some students who might have recorded themselves and then they look at the playback and say, that's not what I sound like, or where's my personality? What advice do you have for students who might be feeling or struggling with that?
This is such an important question. So thank you so much for asking this. And I want to tell you, students, I've got adults that have been in careers forever, that have done their work forever, that are experts, that are a little flipped out on Zoom too. It's different. It's strange. There's a whole different everything about Zoom. And so one of the most powerful things that I can give you, and really this is for Zoom, but you can carry this into real life. From the minute you see my face, I don't want you working from, I got to get to know her, I don't know what she's thinking. I want you in your mind's eye. And what I mean by in your mind's eye is your imagination is, imagine that you're talking to somebody you know, like, and trust. I'm always talking to Bill and Judy at the kitchen table. And so everybody feels like I'm talking to them. Because when I'm talking to somebody in my mind's eye that I'm comfortable with, I'm going to be more conversational. And I want you to pick the person that you trust and like and know the best. Might be a friend, might be a sibling, might be a parent. And this is the person you are your real deal self with. That's really what they're looking for anyway. And it takes some of the weirdness out of the Zoom and even an in-person conversation when I'm talking to Bill and Judy at the kitchen table. And that's what we're after, is finding the best version of you, just like you are, and you're practicing this and at home and at school. That's who they want to know. So that's one of the things that we can look at.
That level of familiarity. Now, oftentimes, it's because students are speaking with someone they've never met before in these interviews, and that person might be contributing to the decision as to whether or not that student gets in. Sometimes students just don't know how to present themselves, right? They get really nervous, and counterintuitively, the best thing is to act as if you're speaking to someone that you're 100% comfortable with, so you can shine, right? So you can be yourself. And I know sometimes students feel like, who should they be and who should they show up as, right? Versus showing up as actually who they are, which is what will help them with standing out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, the data that we're tracking right now is showing us statistics that I've never seen in anything like it in my lifetime. We want to know you. We're not looking for presentation. We're not looking for slick, polished. I want to know who you are. And I know who you are when I hear who you are through your voice. What gets you excited? What are you passionate about? What matters to you? Lean into that vocally, because that's going to give me clues about who you are. And you've said act as if a couple of times, and I want to touch on that because that's actually a technique that I work with, but I'm going to expand on it a little bit, and I'm going to call it act as if the outcome's yours. And when I know the outcome is mine and I come in the door knowing that it is mine. Now, I don't mean act as if like become an actor. You can do that if you want. But if I can choose to work from the place of, they're going to love me, this is going to go great, or this is going to be a disaster, and either one could happen, you better believe I'm going to pick act as if the outcome's yours. Because if you know the outcome's yours, you're going to reveal an even bigger version of who you are. And that's exactly what we want. And I can give you something on the nervousness if you want, but let me know if you want to go in a different direction first.
Well, let me just tag on to what you just said. And yes, I definitely want to hear about that nervousness tip. So I do think that is going to be such a big shift in thinking for students, right? Or even the parents of students who might be walking into their own interviews too. I just was, as you were talking, was thinking about when I was in high school going through my college interviews. Mine were in person because this is way back pre-pandemic. And I was just so nervous at the time. I knew like I had a lot to bring to the table. And yet during those conversations, I felt like I couldn't 100% be myself because there was all this doubt. However, as I got older and had the experience of going into more interviews, job interviews later on, that notion of acting as if I belonged, acting as if I was the right person for the job, knowing that I was going to be the best fit for whatever it was I was going after, that sense of just peace and that sense of just having fun in the conversation, it was so different than when I reflect back on those very first ever college application interviews I had when I was in high school. And I wish I could go back in time and have that same mindset, because I know that I would have felt so much better and could have felt like so much more free to be myself if I walked in with what I know now, having that back when I was in high school.
Yes. Yes. And I think it really goes back to that trying to get it right. And what happens when we're trying to get it right instead of trusting that we are going to get it right is we tend to be assessing what we're doing in the moment. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I don't know if I should have. I wish I'd said that. I don't think they like that. And we're everywhere, but right here in the conversation. And I get it that we like to think ahead and see where we're going next. But I really want you to start working from a different place, which is I'm going to be right here in this question, in this answer, and then we're going to go to the next one. And I'm going to be right here. And if I make a mistake, here's the thing about mistakes. We don't notice them. We don't notice them until you unravel. And so you glitch a word, you stumble over something, that's okay. You can literally say things like, hold on just a minute, or let me rephrase that, or give me just a minute to think about that. We're not assessing you the way you are in your mind. So I want you to really take comfort in that. I want you to really take comfort in that we're here to hear you and we're working on your side. And if you make a little glitch, I think everybody knows that there's nerves involved and there's high stakes in many, many ways involved. And I believe people want you to do your best. I really don't believe that everybody's going, oh, well, they tripped over that word, so they're out. So you don't go there in your mind, because that keeps you right here with me. And it is when you go into all of those thoughts, that's going to fuel the nervousness.
That importance of staying present in the moment, living in the moment. And it's true. I know when, even for job applications in the future, right? One bad answer doesn't necessarily dictate the entire interview, right? Oftentimes there's scores based on the questions that are being asked. And just because maybe you messed up on that one question, you don't, and you have definitely the opportunity to be able to recover, right? And have that opportunity to still get great scores later on. A student recently had asked me, Ms. Gardner, I have an interview. Is it okay if I ask for a moment to think? I know I'm preparing, I'm practicing, but what if they ask me a question that I don't know? Can I take notes? The answer is yes, you could take notes. You can take that moment to think, and it's not like a timed test necessarily, right? You do want to be respectful of time. You do want to end on time, but you can gather your thoughts. They want to hear what you think, and not everybody can respond immediately. Sometimes people who do respond immediately don't do really well. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, just depends on the person. And sometimes it actually benefits people to be able to take that moment. So Tracy, you mentioned that there is some tips that you can give on nervousness. So I'm definitely sure that our families are interested in those.
So the first one might be something that you've never thought about, and it might not be as tangible as what the second one will be. And maybe there'll even be a third. But what this studies show us, and what a large portion of the research that I've done is on thoughts drive feelings in the body. And when I'm talking about feelings in the body, I'm not talking about sad, happy, mad, glad. I'm talking about nervousness is a literal physical feeling. And so if I'm feeling really, really nervous or shaking, or maybe I'm struggling to even breathe, I can't catch my breath, the fastest way for me to calm that nervousness down in my body is to change the thought. And so you don't even have to know what the thought is, but chances are good, if you're feeling really, really nervous, you're possibly thinking, oh, I hope I do well. Oh, I hope I get this right. Oh, I hope I get into this school. Oh, you're thinking things like that. Or you might even be thinking, I don't know if I'm prepared. I don't know if I'm good enough. We go back to that, right? So you want to work from a positive thought, whatever that is. So if you're feeling really nervous, what is a new thought you can think? Maybe it's as simple as, I think this is going to go great. I'm excited about this interview, because, nervousness is simply excitedness without breath, which leads me to something a little more tangible, which is, and this is a tricky one, because when we say things like that, now this is certainly the way I approach voice. When I say things to you like, just remember to breathe, we tend to work out of a habit that is already in place. And when we're feeling under pressure, that is when we might not breathe. That is when we might hold our breath the most. So if you catch yourself and you're not breathing, if you happen to be talking and you're saying an answer, and it might even be making you speak faster, and you notice, oh my gosh, I'm about to run out of air because I'm holding my breath. Whenever you get to the end of that sentence, doesn't have to be a big deal, just taking a breath then. Because what that's going to do is that's going to reset you in your body, and it goes back to that nervousness feeling. You can even take that nervousness and say, oh, wow, I'm really nervous, and turn that into, I am so excited. I can't wait to talk to these people. Literally reframing it like that changes that feeling in your body. There's something else that is one of those mind-body connection things that you can play with in nervousness as well. Nervousness is literally a physical response, and it is generally linked with breathing. But if you could think about a particular piece of clothing that you've had, or you have, maybe it's a blue suit, maybe it's a pair of beautiful purple shoes. I don't know what it is, but when you put that piece of clothing on, you feel so good physically. You feel untouchable. You feel like, yeah, I've got my brown boots on. That's a physical feeling. Go into the interview with your brown boots on. Now you can literally do that, or you can think about the physical feeling of what it feels like when you've got that navy suit on. And imagine that you've put that navy suit on and you come into the interview with that physical representation. Change the thought, move it into excitement, and reset your breathing if you start to feel like you're going off the rails.
Mind is so powerful, right? These exercises, these things you can do in real time to just recenter yourself can make such a difference. And I know for families who are wondering, this sounds interesting. This sounds, is this stuff that we actually need to do or my child needs to do? I think you don't actually realize until you're in the moment and all the nerves are wrapped up and suddenly you run out of breath, right? I think that was something when I was younger, when I was in high school, sometimes when I did presentations, I had to remind myself to breathe, right? I was speaking way too fast.
Yeah.
I was chasing and then I was gasping for breath to keep going. So even though I didn't stumble, I wasn't stuttering, I didn't repeat things. I was saying the script in which I wanted to say, but sometimes I would speak so quickly that I noticed that whole breath piece of it was the challenge, right? I wasn't breathing. So things that seem so obvious, there's something that happens when you're in this heightened state where you might forget to do things as simple as breathing. And that makes such a difference in how you present yourself.
Well, and you're 100% right. And I'm glad you said fast because I want to touch on that. But what you're talking about, and we don't even realize it, we go into brace mode. I call it brace mode. And so if you feel your body, you'll feel yourself holding your air in, and you'll feel almost like you've got a grip on something. Just relax your body. Just relax your body. We can talk these mind things that are so valuable and really drive the physical being in these situations, but there's also a physical piece too. Release the grip, take in a breath. You've got this. And you mentioned fast, and part of fast is breathing. I'm holding my breath and I've got a lot to say, so I'm going to hurry up and say all these words because in a minute I'm going to have to let this air out because I've got to have a breath. I want to tell you, fast is the weakest of the elements of vocal variety. And the reason is we don't know what you know. The reason is it takes time for our ear to process your sound. And I know a lot of people go fast. And when you're nervous, you go fast. And when you want to hurry up and get to the other side of the answer, you go fast. And when you have to take in a breath, you go fast. But if you work on nothing else, I want you to work on slowing down a little bit. And sometimes with some people, maybe they just talk fast. Maybe they're from a particular, maybe they're culturally faster. Well, that's okay. Let's not take fast away. Let's roll in some slower bits. If you find that you're struggling to slow down, it may be that fast is just a part of who you are. So we want to just think about, where can I slow down? Or where can I pause to give them time to process? Because fast, it is the weaker choice. It's harder to follow, but it also can become, however the listener is processing this subconsciously, it can have a checklist feel or a talking at feel. And remember, we talked about, we want you to be conversational, like you're in that conversation with somebody you know, like, and trust. So it's going to work more in your favor to slow down and be more conversational rather than, let me get all this information to you. I've got this and I've got this and I've got this and I've got this, right? It's easier to connect to the other one. And that's a big part of what we're looking to do here.
One thing I tell my students is if they feel like they're speaking too slowly during a time when they're very nervous, they're probably speaking at a great pace.
Right.
That is probably a good sign.
Right. 100%.
And one thing you mentioned was vocal variety. So for our families who might not have ever heard of that term, can you share more what that means?
Sure. Vocal variety, and I've got it broken down into what I call 5 elements. Vocal variety is the movement in the voice. And the movement, the brain follows movement. So the more movement we have, the better. Now, the opposite of movement is everything sounds the same. I don't have any vocal variety and I say everything the same. And you may have heard of this as being monotone. That may be something that you've heard of. Monotone means everything is the same. So what happens is everything has the same value now. And I don't have movement. I don't know who you are. I don't know what's important. Now, I don't want the 5 elements to overwhelm you, because you might think, oh my gosh, how am I going to remember all of that? And I really don't even want you thinking about it. I don't want you overthinking it. One of the reasons I plug in conversational is because when we're talking to somebody we know, like, and trust, we have more movement. But I'm talking about fast, talking about slow. So speed variables, changing up your speed is one of the elements. Volume is another one, louder or quieter, changing your volume. Pause, the most powerful of all the elements. I tell you something and I pause. Elongation, which is degrees of emotion. So I really like that, or I really like that. Elongation shows a degree of emotion. And then we have pitch, which is high and low. Melody, and melody is where the trust is built. So I don't want you to overthink it, but I want you to think about, do I have movement in my voice? One of the fastest ways to get some movement going is to start adding emphasis to certain words. If I say, I like water, okay, that was basically the same, but I can say, I like water. Do you see how I got movement simply from adding emphasis? So what are the important words? What do you want to emphasize? That will automatically get you more movement than you might be working with now, because you might be thinking about your answers.
That definitely keeps the listener engaged, right? And even if students are thinking about, or the families who are listening to this, about movies that you watch, TV shows that you watch, right? That they employ all these different things to be able to capture your attention. We can use that too. And we do use that naturally. And it's just when we're in these settings that are high stakes, oftentimes we just forget these all, right? Even though they're very natural for us to use in everyday speech. So Tracy, you have shared so many wonderful tips. Any closing tips for our families as they are navigating through interviews and students are figuring out how to present their authentic selves? You've already shared so much. Any other final thoughts you'd like to share?
So one thing that might be problematic, maybe, I don't know, you tell me, but what could run into what I'd love to see you release is filler words. And filler words might be, like, sort of. And here's what I want to say about filler words. I don't want you to stress if you say them, but I want you to understand what they are. Is retrieval. Always comes from retrieval. If I'm trying to get all my words and find my words and I'm stumbling around, I'm going to more. So when you go to search for words or your answer, this goes back to this being present and taking your time. Don't try, that's what's going to happen. Take your time, take a pause, collect your thought, and then it will come out of your mouth more fluidly. Words like, sort of, tend to be buffer words. What the data shows me is that when you are rolling in a like, you're concerned about owning your answer. And whatever you've been, all the preparation that you've done to give these answers, this goes all the way back to what we started with. I want you to own it. You don't need to buffer it. I want to know who you are. I want to know what you believe. I want to know where you stand. You don't need to buffer your answers. You just simply need to own them. So those are a couple of things that will level you up even more.
That is probably one of the biggest things I hear students struggle with, is removing these word weeds from conversation, and especially when they're nervous. And that pause is so powerful. And sometimes students feel like using it is painful because it feels like a long silence. And I promise them on the other side, as a listener, it is a few nanoseconds. I don't even notice that you've taken a pause and avoided saying that whatever it is, because it just seems natural for people to take a pause, right? That few seconds to gather your thoughts, the moment it takes for you to be able to switch context, whatever it might be, feels like an eternity, but to the listener, it's just mere moments, and it doesn't take away from someone's abilities. It doesn't take away from someone's credibility. It actually feels, you don't actually notice when someone takes that moment.
That's it. And you had mentioned that earlier, that it feels a certain way to us, but it doesn't to the listener. And every single time, that's the truth with pause. It feels like an eternity and we barely notice. So we don't notice a lengthy pause. We'd be more inclined to notice that you need one than that you did one. So I just want you to know that what you perceive is not necessarily what we're receiving. So start to get comfortable in the uncomfortableness of those pauses. You're going to need them the rest of your life.
I think that is also why it's so important for students to practice and to get feedback. And even if it turns into just recording themselves and then watching what that recording looks like, because that can give you volumes of data on what you think you're projecting versus what you actually are. So Tracy, if there are students who might want to work with you or families who are interested in learning more about you, where can they go?
So probably the best place to go is my website, which is captivatetheroom.com. And if you go to the Work With Me tab, there are options to work with me there.
So Tracy, thank you so much for joining today, sharing your wisdom on how our students can show up more confidently as themselves in their interviews and beyond whenever they are using their voice, the most powerful tool they've got. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube or Facebook Live, let us know in the comments, what did you find to be most helpful? Any tips that you found particularly helpful, let us know. And if you found this useful, please make sure to like and share this with your colleagues and friends. Tracy, thanks so much for your time today. And I know our families and our students have learned so much from this conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for having me.